Hey, third graders, it's Mr. Marshall at Stony Lane. I know that you've been writing information books, the kind of books that teach others about stuff. And so I've been writing an information book myself. Just like you, I tried to pick something that I already knew a lot about so that it'd be easy to write this information book. And so one thing that I know a lot about is U.S. presidents. I've always liked reading about U.S. presidents. I think it's a pretty cool topic. And so I want to show you a page of my book. Ready? This page is called Presidential Relatives. I'm going to read it to you. It says, some presidents are related to other presidents. For example, John Adams and his son John Quincy Adams were both presidents. George Bush and his son George W. Bush were also both presidents. It must be exciting for them to know that someone in their family also got to do this special job. It must be exciting for them because they knew exactly what it was like to have that job. Theodore Roosevelt was president from 1901 to 1909. Years later, his fifth cousin, Franklin Roosevelt, became the president from 1933 to 1945. So, like whenever we write anything, we're always trying to make it the best that it can be, right? And so, something that writers always do, whether they're writing stories or they're writing information books or whatever, they're always trying to do something called revision, right? You've heard that word before because you're in third grade already. Revision. Revision means that we look at our writing and we try to make it better, right? We look at it again and we try to make it better. So, one way that we can revise when we're writing information books like this is we can take two sentences that are sort of alike and put them together into one longer sentence. Sometimes that can make our writing sound better. Okay. And so let's take a look and see if there's a place in this writing where we can do that. Some presidents are related to other presidents. For example, John Adams and his son John Quincy Adams were both presidents. George Bush and his son George W. Bush were also both presidents. I'm thinking I'm thinking these two sentences are sort of alike, aren't they? They're sort of alike because one is about John Adams and his son, and the other is about George Bush and his son. So let me see if I can combine them. Let's see. For example, John Adams and his son John Quincy Adams were both presidents, and George Bush and his son George W. Bush were also both presidents. I could probably make those two sentences into one, can't I? Because they're kind of about the same thing. It's just they're two different examples. So let's see how that sounds. For example, John Adams and his son John Quincy Adams were both presidents. I'm going to take that period and change it to a comma. And I'm going to put the word and. That way I make them into one, what grown-ups call a compound sentence. Let's see how that sounds. For example, John Adams and his son, John Quincy Adams, were both presidents, and George Bush and his son, George W. Bush, were also both presidents. Do you see what I did? I'm going to see if I can kind of clean it up a little and see if there's any words that repeat that I can take away and still make it make sense. For example, John Adams and his son, John Quincy Adams, were both presidents, and George Bush and his son, George W. Bush, were also both presidents. I think this "were both presidents" kind of repeats. Let me see what it sounds like. I'm not going to cross it out yet. I'm going to read it without those words. Ready? For example, John Adams and his son John Quincy Adams, and George Bush and his son George W. Bush were both presidents. I like that. I think it makes sense. So I'm going to cross that out. Now listen to my writing. It says, for example, John Adams and his son John Quincy Adams, and George Bush and his son George W. Bush were both presidents. Well, I'm going to say they were all presidents because now I have a lot of people in there. Okay? I've combined those two sentences. What did I do? The first step is I found two sentences that were kind of alike. They said the same thing, maybe with different examples. The second thing that I did was I took away the period in the middle. I put a comma there and I put and. Sometimes that's going to be or, sometimes that's going to be but it's usually a little word like that. And then I went back and I cleaned it up. The third thing I did was I cleaned it up. I looked for other words that repeated and I took those away too. Okay? So that's one way that you can revise. See if there's any sentences in your writing that you can combine and revise in that way. Okay. And then I'll be back again another day to do a little more revision work with you. Thanks.